Welcome back to Nature Documentary for Sleep. If you enjoy slow geography, leave a comment and consider liking and subscribing. Tonight, you're landing on Socotra, a stranded fragment in the Arabian Sea with geology that refuses to look normal. It's pre-dawn at Hadabu, and the air carries resin, salt, and whetstone from the last wave slap. Ahead, granite peaks rise through pale limestone, like two maps printed on the same page. You head inland by the seasonal wadis, dry channels that only become rivers when the sky cooperates. In the canyon shade, water appears in small pools, then disappears into karst cracks without explanation or ceremony. By late afternoon on the Dixum Plateau, fog climbs uphill and beads on rock, feeding plants that drink the air. And when you finally step onto the island's hard granite spine, your route depends on one constraint, where faults, contacts, and fractures can still deliver reliable spring water. Your boots start on asphalt that pretends it will last. Then it turns to patched concrete, then gravel, then a rumor of a road. The driver drops you where the last cell signal coughs and dies. He points inland, like direction is a favor, then leaves you with the heat. Your pack feels heavier immediately, because now it matters. The first escalation arrives as a sound. Not thunder, not wind. A low, mechanical grind from the sea behind you. As the swell shifts, the harbor is still there, but the crossing back is already becoming a question. You have one weather window before the monsoon leans in and locks the door. So you do the only thing that makes sense on an island like this. You start walking upstream in a river that does not exist. The Wadi is a scar through pale limestone rubble. It is wide, braided, and dry, like a sleeping animal. You keep to the inside bends where old floods left smoother stones. You can read water history in the shapes, like handwriting. Round cobbles mean patience. Sharp blocks mean violence, recent and unresolved. A thin line of green follows the lowest ground. It is not generous green. It is cautious, defensive, goat-sized. A boy appears with a stick and a flock, as if summoned by any hint of vegetation. He watches you the way the island watches everyone, without interest, without apology. You look at his jerry can before you look at his face. He notices. He shrugs and points toward the walls of the wadi, toward shadow. That is your first clue that water is not where you want it to be. The sun clears the low ridge and the air changes character. It stops being cool. It becomes a dry hand on the back of your neck. The limestone underfoot turns chalky, then slick, then broken into plates. You step on a slab and hear it ring, hollow, karst. Limestone that has been quietly dissolved from the inside out. It looks solid until it decides it is not. You keep moving because standing still is how you start bargaining with the heat. The wadi narrows and the walls rise and shade returns in strips. In the strip of shade, you find a pool. It is the size of a small table, perfectly still, dark as tea. You crouch and smell it. Not rotten, mineral, like wet coins and old stone. You dip a finger, then taste. It is cold enough to feel wrong in this air. That means it has been underground, protected, stored like contraband. You fill your bottle slowly, listening. There is no trickle feeding it, no visible inlet, just water sitting in a pocket, pretending it has always been here. You look for tracks, goat prints, yes. Human sandal prints, yes. And something that looks like a dog or a fox circling the edge. This pool is not a secret. It is a schedule. You drink anyway because philosophy is dehydrating. When you stand, you notice the pool is lower than you remember. Not by much, but enough to make you stare, as if you can catch evaporation in the act. The sun climbs, and the canyon begins to breathe. Warm air slides down the walls, then lifts like a slow bellows. You follow the Wadi deeper into Wadi Ayaft, where the walls pinch close. The limestone is layered here, banded with soft browns and grays. It looks like a cake that no one should eat. In places, the rock is pocked with little holes. You put your ear against it and hear nothing. That is the unsettling part. Water can be inside a mountain, moving, and you will never hear it. You round a bend and find a second pool, then a third. Each one sits in its own basin, like a series of reluctant gifts. Between them, the channel is dry again. The water appears, then disappears, with no respect for your expectations. This is the reveal the Wadis teach early. Socotra does not do continuous. It does pockets. It does interruptions. You walk into a patch of trees that smells sharp and sweet. Frankincense, clinging to cracks in the limestone. The trunks twist as if trying to pull away from the ground. Their bark peels in papery sheets, exposing pale wood beneath. You run a finger along a tear in the bark, and it sticks. Resin. The tree is bleeding slowly, as if the air itself is abrasive. You think of wealth, of incense routes, of empires that followed scent like a compass. Then you look at the soil, thin, rocky, and already sliding downhill in small, defeated rills. This is not a garden. This is a compromise. A goat clatters above you on a ledge, dislodging pebbles. The pebbles bounce down the wall and ping off stone near your head. You step back instinctively. Socotra does not need predators to keep you alert. It has gravity and loose rock, and that is plenty. You keep tracking the water because it is the only reliable narrative. You find a place where the channel drops into a dark slot. The limestone has split, and the Wadi funnels into a crack, wide enough for your arm. You kneel and shine a light. The beam disappears into black. Cool air breathes out of it, faint but steady. You hear it then? Finally. The softest movement, not a stream, more like a whispering drip deep below. This is the island's plumbing, and you are looking at a drain. You could keep to the main bed, where walking is easier, or you could climb to the side, following a line of greener shrubs that hints at seepage. This is your first clear decision point, and it is not romantic. The main bed saves your legs. The green line might save your water plan. You choose the green line. You scramble up rubble, using hands, feeling the limestone crumble under your fingers. A rock breaks free and slides, and you freeze, waiting for the cascade. It stops after a few seconds, like the slope is reconsidering. On the ledge, the air is cooler. A faint wet smell comes from a seam in the wall. You press your palm to the rock and feel dampness. Not enough to drink, but enough to confirm the logic. Water is traveling inside the limestone, and only leaks where the rock is cracked just right. You mark the seam mentally like an address. If you have to return, you will aim for this fracture, not the map. You move on because the sun does not pause for field notes. By mid-morning, the canyon opens slightly and light pours in. The heat follows, immediate and rude. You start to sweat and then stop sweating, which is worse. The air is so dry, it steals moisture faster than your body can spend it. You sip instead of gulping. And it feels like pretending. Ahead, you see a cluster of palms where the Wadi bends, date palms, tight and stubborn, gathered around a spring that refuses to show itself. A small settlement sits nearby, low stone walls, a few goats, one rusted truck that looks like it has given up. A man stands in the shade, watching you approach with the calm of someone who knows the terrain will outlast you. You greet him, and he answers without moving much. You ask about water, and he points not to the palms, but to a spot higher on the wall. A thin trickle runs from a crack, disappearing into the dust before it reaches the bed. He has placed a cut plastic pipe under it, guiding it to a bucket. This is what infrastructure looks like when the budget is geology. You watch the drip rate. It is slow, but it is steady, and steady is everything. He tells you with a shrug that the Wadi floods sometimes, not like rain, like a wall. When the sky cooperates, it arrives all at once, with rocks and branches and someone else's problems. He points to a line on the wall, above your head, a stain of debris. That is the last flood mark. Congratulations. You are hiking in a place that can be bone dry for months, then try to kill you in 10 minutes. You fill your bottle again, thanking him, and move on. Your route is still inland, still upward, toward the high spine, because Socotra's story is written in layers. Coast, limestone skin, plateau, then the granite bones. If you stop now, you only get the tourist version, and you did not come here to be comforted by postcards. The Wadi becomes rougher as you gain elevation. The limestone is more fractured. The bed is strewn with boulders that look freshly placed. Like a careless builder, you step around them and see angular faces broken recently from the walls. Rockfall. Thermal stress, maybe. Or a tremor from somewhere offshore, the Arabian plate and the Somali plate still adjusting their grip. Socotra is a fragment, marooned by rifting, like a piece of a plate that missed the rest of its sentence. You stop in a rare patch of shade and look back. The land behind you slopes toward the sea in soft lines, but the mountains ahead rise abruptly, darker, more solid. The Hagir Mountains, the granite core, old crystalline rock, pushed up and exposed. The island's spine. It looks closer than it is, because clear air lies. You check your water again. Half gone, you check the sky. A smear of cloud far out over the sea. Not yet committed. Clouds here are not decoration. They are negotiations between wind and stone. If the wind turns too early, fog will climb. If it turns wrong, nothing will climb. And you will cook. You continue because the window is still open. As you walk, you notice the vegetation thinning. More bare rock, more dust. The goats still find something because goats are specialists in disappointment. They pick at thorny shrubs and look offended by the effort. You pass a slope where the soil has been scraped nearly clean. You can see the limestone bedrock, pale and exposed, with only a few tufts of grass. This is what overgrazing looks like on an island with no spare skin. Every hoofprint loosens grains that the wind will steal. Every lost grain makes it harder for the next plant to hold on. Erosion is not dramatic here. It is administrative. Paperwork in the form of dust. You start to feel the breeze change. It comes in cooler pulses, carrying salt. You taste the ocean again, even though you cannot see it. The Wadi bends, and the valley opens toward a broad upland. The Dixum Plateau is ahead, a high limestone table where the horizon drops away on all sides. It is not a gentle plateau. It is cracked, pitted, and sharp-edged, like a broken dinner plate. You climb out of the wadi onto the plateau margin, and the ground changes under your feet. Limestone pavement, etched by water into grooves and ridges. The surface is rough, like it has been rasped. Small sinkholes open without warning. Shallow ones and deep ones. Some are filled with thorny bushes because life loves a depression. Some are empty, dark mouths breathing cool air. You step carefully because twisting an ankle here is not an inconvenience. It is a plan change, and Socotra does not reward improvisation. By late afternoon, the light softens, and the air should be cooling. Instead, it thickens. A faint haze gathers on the seaward edge, and you feel moisture touch your skin. Not rain, just the suggestion of wet. Fog. It comes low and slow, rolling uphill like a tide that forgot its shoreline. The first droplets bead on your hair and eyebrows. You hold out your sleeve and watch it darken in spots. Fog is water you cannot collect unless you know the trick. And on Socotra, the plants know the trick better than you do. You walk toward a line of darker shapes on the plateau, silhouettes against the mist. As you approach, the shapes resolve into trees that look like they were designed by someone who hates normal biology. Dragon's blood trees. Thick trunks, smooth bark, and a crown that spreads wide and flat like an umbrella turned upward. The branches fork repeatedly, making a dense canopy that catches fog like a net. Droplets form, then fall, drip by drip, onto the ground beneath. It is a private rain, manufactured from air. You stand under one and listen. Tiny taps on stone. This is not poetic. This is engineering. The tree takes moisture from the wind, then shares it with its own roots. It also shades the soil, reducing evaporation. It creates a little microclimate, a personal survival bubble. You can see why life got weird here. Isolation is one part, but water is the sculptor. Fog turns a stone plateau into a place where trees can exist without rivers. You walk along the fog edge because you want to see where it starts and where it fails. On the windward side, everything is damp. Lichens brighten on rock. Small succulents swell with stolen moisture. On the leeward side, a few steps away, it is dry again, and the plants look smaller, meaner. This is the fog line, the border between survivable and spiteful. You camp near a shallow sinkhole that offers a bit of shelter. The ground is uneven, and your sleeping pad slides on limestone. You wedge it with stones because the island does not provide comfort, only options. You eat something simple because cooking feels like an argument with the wind. As dusk deepens, the fog thickens, then thins, then thickens again. It moves like an animal circling you, undecided. You listen to it, which sounds stupid, until you realize it has a sound, a faint hiss as droplets gather and fall from leaves, a soft brush as mist slides past rock. The plateau is not silent. It is quietly busy, like a kitchen at closing time. You check your route for the morning. Your plan is to reach the granite spine before the wind strengthens. The ridge route is exposed, and Socotra winds do not play. They arrive with monsoon season like a switch flipping, turning the sea into a wall and the highlands into a funnel. If you wait, you risk getting pinned here, fog-fed but directionless. If you move early, you risk navigating in low visibility on broken limestone. So you make the choice you always make when the map turns into a suggestion. You move while the world is still dim. You pack by feel, zipper sounds swallowed by fog. Your fingers come away cold and slightly wet, as if the air has teeth. You stand, and the limestone under you feels slicker than it looked last night. It is not dew, exactly. It is fog that has decided to become weight. You take a bearing off a darker ridgeline, then you immediately lose it. Because fog does not care about your confidence. It fills the shallow dips and leaves the high points almost clear, like it is mocking the idea of level ground. You step between grooves in the limestone pavement, following the path of least ankle damage. The rock is carved into parallel channels, runnels etched by water that arrives, then vanishes. This is dissolution, slow chemical theft. Rainwater picks up CO2 from air and soil, becomes weak carbonic acid, and eats limestone politely over centuries. It is the most patient demolition you will ever walk on. You think you are crossing a plateau. Wrong. You are crossing a sponge made of stone, full of voids, sinkholes, and drains that lead nowhere you can follow. A gust hits you from the seaward edge, cool and salted. It pushes fog sideways, and for a moment, the world sharpens. You see the dragon's blood trees again, scattered like green ink blots. You also see what lives between them. Bare ground, thin soil, goat paths stitched into the limestone like scratches. Everywhere the canopy is missing, the ground looks scabbed and tired. Congratulations. You have reached an ecosystem that works only if nothing breaks it. And humans brought goats. You keep moving because the wind is building a voice. It starts as a whisper around your ears, then becomes a steady press against your chest. On the horizon, the dark shape of the Hagier Mountains rises, and it looks like a different planet. The limestone is pale, almost luminous under fog. The granite ahead is darker, denser, like it is absorbing the morning. You aim for that boundary, because boundaries are where stories hide. The plateau tilts upward, so slowly you only notice by the burn in your calves. The ground becomes more fractured. Sinkholes deepen. Some are wide enough to hold a house if you were willing to put a house in a hole. You skirt the rims, peering down into cool darkness. In one, you see a smear of green ferns and moss clinging to shaded walls. A small, private wet world surviving on drip and fog. Above it, the wind dries your lips in minutes. This is Socotra's specialty. Microclimates stacked like mismatched blankets. You reach a line of low shrubs bent permanently downwind. They all lean the same way. That is your compass now. Wind direction, plant posture, and the slope of stone. The fog thins again, and the sun punches through. It is not warm. It is immediate. It turns moisture on your skin into a cooling sting for about 30 seconds. Then it becomes a lamp aimed at your skull. You adjust your scarf and keep your eyes on the ridge. Because the worst thing on a plateau like this is getting distracted by how pretty the light. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request, because beauty is a reliable way to walk yourself into a hole you did not see. You keep your eyes low. You watch for the fine fractures, the hairline cracks that turn into sinkholes with no warning. You learn to read limestone like a bad mood. The pale rock is not blank, it is annotated. Every groove is a record of water that showed up, did damage, then left without paying rent. The fog finally peels back in torn strips. It reveals the plateau edge, and beyond it, a drop so sudden, your stomach reacts first. The land falls away into a canyon system, wadis branching like dry veins. Down there, somewhere, water is moving in the dark, doing its quiet sabotage. Up here, the wind is rearranging your body heat with professional focus. You walk toward the darker mass ahead, because the granite spine is not subtle. The limestone underfoot stays bright, almost chalky, even when it is damp. The granite ahead looks like cooled anger, and the boundary between them is not a smooth handshake. It is a messy argument, broken rock, mixed rubble, a contact zone where two eras meet. You step onto the first scattered granite boulders, and the sound changes. Limestone rings hollow. Granite answers with a dull, stubborn thud. It feels colder under your palm, even in sun. That is not magic. That is thermal inertia, dense crystalline rock refusing to change temperature for your convenience. Congratulations. You have reached the part of the island that does not dissolve politely. It breaks. It fractures. It holds grudges for millions of years. Your route tightens now because granite does not hide water the way limestone does. It does not have the same honeycomb of karst drains. Water on granite tends to run off unless it finds a fracture, a joint, a fault. So the game changes from finding holes to finding cracks. You climb into a shallow saddle where the wind accelerates. The air funnels between slopes, and it hits you like a door pushed open too hard. Your pack straps hum faintly. Small pebbles skitter across the rock surface, driven by gusts. You crouch instinctively, not because it helps, but because your body prefers ritual to panic. Cloud shreds race overhead, low enough to feel close. They do not become rain. They just scrape across the ridge and leave. This is the Hagier mood. Moisture arrives, gets wrung out somewhere else, and you get the leftovers, wind and glare. You keep moving upward because exposure is a timer. The longer you stand on a ridgeline, the more chances the island gets to remind you who owns gravity. The slope steepens into broken blocks. Granite here is split into angular slabs, like a demolished sidewalk. This is jointing, old cooling fractures widened by time. Then weather gets involved. Heat expands the rock by day. Night cold shrinks it again. Salt crystals wedge into pores. The stone does not soften, it pops. You hear one of those pops now, somewhere above you. A sharp crack, like someone snapping a stick, then a pause. Then a stone clacks down the slope in uneven beats. It misses you by enough to feel personal. You look up and see nothing moving because the rock already finished its tantrum. That is how it works here. Most danger is over by the time you locate it. You pick your way through the boulders, placing feet carefully, testing each surface. The granite is rough, good for grip, but the rubble under it is treacherous. Loose gravel sits on hard slabs, and it behaves like ball bearings. You do not rush. You cannot afford a fall, not when the radio signal is already fading into static. You reach a notch where the ridge pinches and the view opens in both directions. To the north, haze over the sea. To the south, a different haze. Drier, dustier, like the interior is exhaling old heat. You taste salt again, but weaker now. You are high enough that the air feels scraped clean, thinner, sharper. Not alpine thin, but enough to notice your breath catching on climbs. The mountain is not tall by world standards, but it is tall by island standards, which means weather treats it like a lever. Wind grabs it and uses it to throw turbulence across the plateau. You aim for the pass ahead, a higher saddle between peaks. Your map shows it as a simple line. Your eyes see a broken staircase of rock. You move anyway, because the leeward basin on the far side should hold sheltered springs. That is the promise. Shelter, water, a place to regroup before pushing south. The wind rises again, not gradually. It steps up like someone turning a dial. It catches your scarf and snaps it sideways. It plucks at loose fabric and tries to unbalance you. You lean into it, and for a moment, you understand why trees on the plateau grow like umbrellas. They are not reaching for sun. They are negotiating with wind. You crest a small rise and find a scatter of boulders piled at odd angles. Fresh rockfall. The edges are sharp, not yet dulled by weather. Dust still sits on the surfaces like flour. You slow down, scanning above. The cliff face here is fractured into blocks, and the gusts are prying at them like fingers. Somewhere inside the granite, stress is being redistributed. It is not dramatic until it is. A cloud shred drops lower, and suddenly visibility thins. Not fog, not the soft plateau mist. This is moving cloud racing through the saddle in torn curtains. It makes the light pulse, bright, dim, bright again, like the island is flickering. You push on, because stopping here is worse than continuing. You climb into the saddle, and the wind hits hardest. It is not just loud, it is physical. It presses against your ears, and you feel that dull, underwater sensation. Your eyes water immediately, not from emotion, but from forced evaporation. You blink hard and keep your gaze on the ground, because grit is now airborne. Then the mountain makes a sound that is not wind, a deeper crack, a splitting report that echoes. You freeze. The instinct is ancient and useless, but you obey it. Above the saddle, a block shifts. You do not see it move at first. You see dust bloom from a seam, a pale puff against dark rock. Then the block releases. It drops, strikes, shatters, and becomes many smaller problems. Rocks rattle down both sides of the saddle, bouncing, colliding, accelerating. You press yourself into the lee of a boulder and wait, heart punching your ribs. Pebbles pepper the ground around you. One stone the size of your fist slams into the slope and explodes into fragments. The noise is violent, then suddenly over. Silence returns in a way that feels wrong. Because wind is still roaring, you lift your head slowly. The pass behind you is now littered with fresh debris, a fan of rock and dust. The route you came up is not gone, but it is made unreliable. Loose blocks sit poised above the trail line. The next gust could knock them free. The next thermal snap could do it. The island has politely suggested you do not go back that way. You look at the sky because you want a sign. The sky offers only more moving cloud and a hard glare around the edges. You look at your water. Less than you want. You look at the leeward side, and it looks calmer, darker, more protected. So you do what you have to do. You commit forward. You drop down the far side of the saddle into the interior basin. The wind changes immediately. It is still there, but softened, less direct. The air warms as you lose elevation, and it feels like stepping into a different room. The granite slopes are cut by narrow gullies, dry channels that only carry water when storms decide to be brief and cruel. You descend carefully because loose rock is everywhere and gravity is bored. Here, the geology reads differently. The granite is the island's core, older than the limestone skin. It formed deep underground, cooled slowly, grew crystals that locked together like stubborn teeth. Then rifting happened far away, and the crust stretched, thinned, cracked. A fragment became an island, marooned when the Gulf of Aden opened like a seam being pulled apart. That is the tectonic truth under the postcard. Two plates drifting like shopping carts in a parking lot, except the collision is sideways, the timeline is obscene, and you get islands as accidental debris. Socotra did not rise because it wanted to be special. It rose because the planet was rearranging itself, and this piece ended up isolated. Isolation is not romantic. It is a supply chain problem for everything living here. You descend into a basin that looks emptied out. Vegetation thins, then almost disappears. The soil is sparse, patchy, caught in pockets between rocks. The wind has scraped the surface clean in places, exposing bare stone like bone. Heat pools here, and it has that metallic edge like sun on rusted tools. You look for the obvious sign of water. Green. There is very little. But then you notice a line, not a path, not a wadi bed. A subtle alignment of small gullies, all pointing the same direction. A faint step in the terrain, like a scar, a fault line, a fracture in the crust where rock moved against rock long ago. Faults are not just earthquake souvenirs. They are plumbing. They crush rock into broken zones, and broken rock can store water. They create pathways, and sometimes they force water out where it has no other exit. If you want a spring, you look for damage. You follow the alignment because it is the only clue that feels intentional. You move laterally across the basin Contouring along the slope, the ground crunches underfoot, granite grit and small shards. The air smells dry, with a faint mineral tang, as if the rocks are slowly oxidizing in silence. You pass a patch of darker stone, stained with something reddish. Iron minerals, leached and redeposited by water that once moved here. It is old evidence, but evidence matters. You keep scanning for green, because green is the island's most honest signpost. Then you see it. A small cluster of shrubs, brighter than the rest, tucked against a low outcrop. Not lush, just noticeably alive. You approach, and the air feels cooler by a fraction. You hear something you did not know you were listening for. A faint trickle, not in open air, but inside rock. You crouch and find a narrow seam where granite meets a different material, a lighter band, weathered and crumbly, a contact zone, two rock types touching, two permeability rules colliding, and there at the seam, a thread of water. It seeps out, clear and steady, forming a tiny wet fan on the stone. You touch it, cold, so cold it feels like it belongs to another day. You taste it, metallic, slightly bitter, like wet pennies. It is not delicious. It is water, which is a better category than delicious out here. You fill your bottle slowly, because the flow is not generous. It is polite the way the island is polite when it is deciding whether to let you continue. You sit back against the rock, breathing, listening to the trickle. This is the sound of geology doing you a favor. It is also the sound of a schedule you do not control. This spring exists because the fault crushed the rock here, opened pathways, because rain, when it does arrive, infiltrates fractures, because the granite, though less porous than limestone, still holds water in its broken zones, and because gravity brings that water down until it hits a barrier, a contact, something less permeable, forcing it to emerge. It is cause and effect, written in stone. You rest only long enough to stop shaking from the climb and the rockfall adrenaline. Then, you make the next decision, the one that matters for the interior crossing. You do not follow the easiest terrain. You follow the fault. You trace it like a rail line, because it is more reliable than any trail. You move along the alignment of gullies and stained rock, using the landscape as a diagram. Sometimes the fault is obvious, a sharp break in slope. Sometimes it is subtle, only a line of greener plants where moisture lingers. You learn the pattern, where the ground dips, where gravel changes color, where small trees cluster. There is often a seep nearby. Your route becomes strange, efficient, almost mechanical. Not north or south, not toward a landmark, but a long structure. This is what it means to travel by geology. It is not inspiring. It is practical in a way that feels mildly humiliating. You are not the hero here. You are a mammal following cracks in rock, hoping for leakage. The day pushes into midday, and the basin heats up like an oven with the door closed. Wind still moves, but it is drier now, and it feels like it is taking something from you each time it passes. You tighten your water ration, small sips, spaced out, because your body will beg you to drink it all at once. Your body is not in charge. You pass slopes dotted with trees that look like they were placed at random. Frankincense again, but different here. They cling to thinner soils, perched on fractured limestone remnants and mixed rubble. Their roots snake into cracks, exploiting tiny moisture reserves. They grow slowly, twisted, with that peeled bark, as if even the wind is sanding them down. You stop near one and press your hand to the trunk. It is warm on the sun side, cool on the shaded side. You see resin tears hardened into amber-like beads. This is the island's other economy, the scent that once traveled farther than the people who harvested it. And like everything else here, it depends on just enough water, delivered irregularly. You move on, following the fault corridor as it bends. The terrain begins to tilt downward, subtly at first, then more insistently. That means you are trending toward the south, toward the coast that takes the brunt of different winds. You notice the air changing again, not cooler, but sharper. With salt haze, a faint whitening in the distance suggests sea spray carried far inland. Humidity drops even though you are approaching the ocean. That is the trick. On Socotra, the sea does not always mean moisture you can use. Sometimes it means dry monsoon winds, hot and turbulent, stripping the land. The corridor of greener hints narrows. The fault gives you occasional seepage, but not always. The plants grow more spaced out. The staining on the rocks becomes more erratic. You begin to feel the next gap in reliable water approaching, the way you feel a stair step in the dark. You check your bottle again. Not enough for comfort. Enough for calculation. The map suggests another spring farther along, near where the fault intersects a larger gully. The map is also a piece of paper with opinions. The island is the one with authority. You pick up your pace because afternoon is sliding toward late afternoon. Light shifts, becomes more golden, more forgiving, which is when people make mistakes. You traverse a slope of loose scree, and each step slides half a step back. Your calves burn, and your boots fill with grit. You pause at a rock outcrop to catch breath, and you see the southern escarpment for the first time. Not the coast itself, but the hint of it. A line where land drops steeply, cliffs cutting the horizon. The ocean beyond is a darker blue, heavy, textured by wind. You realize the island does not taper gently into beaches down there. It ends abruptly, like a sentence cut off mid-word. You continue along the fault until the gully widens. You find a spot where the rock changes again, a band of lighter material, fractured and crumbly. Water likes boundaries. You climb down into the gully, stepping over dry stones polished smooth by past floods. And there, tucked under a ledge, you find dampness. Not a stream, not a pool, just a wet patch on stone, darkened, glistening. You scrape a small channel with a flat rock, guiding the seep into a cup. It fills painfully slowly. You wait anyway, because waiting is sometimes the only tool you have. While it drips, you watch the gully walls. You see layers of deposited debris, old flood lines, and boulders lodged high above the current bed. Proof that when water comes here, it comes as a moving wall. Rare events do most of the work. That is the principle that shapes this island. Not daily gentle rain, but occasional violent correction. When your bottle is topped off enough to move, you climb out of the gully and aim for the westward trend of the escarpment. The wind strengthens again, now carrying more salt and a faint roar. You do not see the sea yet, but you can hear it, distant and persistent. It is not the soft sound of waves on sand. It is impact, wave energy hitting rock over and over, like the ocean is trying to break in. As you approach the cliff line, the ground becomes rougher, more broken. Limestone returns in patches, forming a cap over darker rock. In places, it is undercut, hollowed, fragile. You see small caves at the cliff edge, and you stay back because cliff edges on karst are not edges. They are suggestions. The first blowhole announces itself with sound, a deep inhaling whoomp, then an exhale that throws spray upward in a white burst. It repeats, timed with the swell. The ocean is breathing through the island. Waves force water into sea caves. Air compresses, pressure builds, and the only escape is up through cracks and vents. So the island becomes an instrument, and the sea plays it with a hammer. You step closer, cautiously, to see one. The hole is not dramatic from above, just a dark opening in rock. Then the next set hits, and the hole erupts. A column of spray shoots up, scattering droplets into the wind. The droplets sting your face with salt. You laugh once, involuntarily, because it is absurd. You came for quiet geology, and the coast is doing percussion. You follow the cliff line westward because you need a descent. The cliff edge keeps changing shape under your feet, not dramatically, just enough to make you distrust it. You walk on limestone that looks solid, then tap it and hear the hollow answer. You stay a few long steps inland because coastal karst loves betrayal. The ocean keeps throwing itself at the base of the wall, and the sound comes up through the rock. It is a low, constant violence, like a drumline you cannot see. Every few seconds, the blowholes add their own punctuation. A deep inhale you feel more than hear, then a sudden exhale of spray. The wind tears that spray apart and salts your lips again. If you wanted fresh water, you made an interesting choice coming here. You keep moving west, scanning for any weakness in the cliff. A gully, a talus slope, a place where gravity already did the hard work of making stairs. The cliff is not one clean wall. It is a messy edge, scalloped by caves, undercut by waves, patched by collapses. You see sections where the limestone cap has cracked away, exposing darker rock below. In those places, the face looks bruised, as if the island is showing its older layers. You stop at a notch where the wind funnels up from a sea cave. It smells different here, sharper, fishy, with a metallic salt tang. The cave below is invisible, but you can hear the water inside it surge and retreat. Wave, push, boom. Then a sucking draw as it backs out. This is not a shoreline. It is a hydraulic machine. You think you are watching erosion. Wrong. You are watching undercutting. The ocean chewing from below until the roof forgets it is a roof. When the sea removes support, the cliff does not lean politely. It breaks without negotiation. You look along the edge and notice fresh scars, pale rock faces where something peeled away recently. The exposed limestone is bright, almost white, like bone in sun. It will darken with time, then crack again, then join the surf as gravel. Socotra is not only isolated by water, it is being fed back into it, grain by grain. You step around a patch of collapsed rubble and feel the scale of it. Blocks as big as small rooms, piled at the base, already being worked by waves. The ocean does not care how hard the rock is. It only cares about time, and it has plenty. A gust hits you from the south, drier and warmer than you expect at a cliffline. It carries a thin salt haze that makes the horizon look smeared. This is the South Coast mood, exposed to winds that do not bring comfort. You check your bottle again, and you do not like the weight. The springs are inland. Out here, you have surf, spray, and thirst, the holy trinity of bad ideas. You keep walking because you are looking for a descent, not a view. The cliffline bends, and the sound of blowholes fades for a moment. The surf becomes more even, more continuous. That often means a different coastal shape, maybe a small cove. You pick up your pace, careful but urgent, because the light is lowering. Late afternoon makes the land look kinder than it is. Shadows stretch, and suddenly every sharp edge looks soft. That is when ankles and cliffs get their best work done. You reach a section where the cliff breaks into steps, a slope of fallen rock leading down. A talus apron, loose blocks stacked at the angle of rest, as if the island is sighing material into the sea. It is not a trail, but it is a possibility. You crouch and watch the waves below for a full minute. You count sets, because the ocean has habits even when it is angry. 3 or 4 larger swells, then a brief lull, then another set. The rocks at the bottom glisten with wetness, and that wetness is a warning. If you go down, you commit to a narrow strip of land between cliff and surf. If you stay up, you spend the night exposed, wind-blasted, and dry. Congratulations! You have reached the kind of choice maps never mention. You shoulder your pack and start down, because thirst is louder than caution. The first steps feel stable, the larger blocks interlocked, reluctant to move. Then the slope shifts to smaller rubble, and every foot placement slides. Your boots kick loose stones that skitter downward, tapping and clacking like nervous laughter. You lean into the slope, using hands on bigger rocks, feeling sharp edges bite your palms. The rock is warm where the sun hit it all day, and cool where it stayed shaded. That temperature difference has been prying at fractures for years, and you can feel it in the looseness. Halfway down, you pause and look back up. The clifftop already feels far, like a different decision. The wind is weaker here, partially blocked by the wall behind you, but you can feel another force now, the pull of the sea sound, closer, heavier. The surf hits a ledge, and the impact resonates through the boulders under your feet. It feels like the whole slope is lightly vibrating, as if the ocean is testing it. You continue down because stopping is how you start imagining the slope moving. Near the bottom, the talus narrows into a ledge of larger blocks. The sea is only a short distance away now, close enough that you can feel cool spray in bursts. The air is damp for the first time in hours, but it is not useful damp. It is salt damp, the kind that dries your mouth faster. You step onto a flat slab and realize it is not bedrock. It is a fallen chunk of the cliff, paused here temporarily, waiting to be ground smaller. Everything on this coast is temporary. just on different timescales. You find a line where you can move laterally along the base, heading toward a darker recess. The cliff above is pocked with small caves and holes, some big enough to crawl into. You avoid the obvious ones because obvious places collect falling rock. You want shelter that is boring. You find it in a shallow notch where the wall leans slightly outward, giving you a little overhang. The ground is coarse sand mixed with shell fragments and ground coral. It crunches under your boots like broken porcelain. You drop your pack and feel your shoulders release in a way that is almost painful. The wind still reaches you, but it is less constant. The surf is still loud, but it is at least predictable. You sit and take a slow drink because your throat wants to gulp, and you refuse it. Out here, you ration even comfort. As the light fades, you start to notice the beach itself. It is not soft, tourist sand. It is sharp, angular grit, the byproduct of reef and limestone turned into weapons. You pick up a handful and let it fall through your fingers. Tiny bits of shell, little chips of coral, pale grains that glitter, then disappear into shadow. This is yesterday's ocean life, repurposed into abrasion. You listen to the waves and realize they are sorting the grains with every surge. Heavy bits stay. Light bits get pulled and redeposited. The beach is a conveyor belt, always moving, always adjusting. Even while you sit, it is changing under you. The cliff behind you looms, and you do not like how close it feels. You look up and see fractured ledges, small blocks perched at odd angles. You move your sleeping spot a few steps away from the direct fall line. It is not a guarantee. It is just a gesture. You eat something without enthusiasm because your body needs fuel to stay warm later. Night by the sea can be oddly cold, especially when wind keeps stealing your heat. The sky darkens and the horizon disappears into a single black band. Stars begin to show above, sharp points that feel too clean for this noisy coast. The blowholes are still active farther along, but from here, they sound like distant breathing. The island is inhaling and exhaling through stone, and you are sleeping inside the same system. You lie down and feel the ground's hardness through your pad. You close your eyes and still see the moving brightness of spray in your mind. Sleep comes in fragments, like the island's water. A doze, then a wave set hits louder and wakes you. Another doze, then a gust changes the pitch of the surf. You stop trying to sleep deeply and settle for resting, because the coast does not care about your circadian rhythm. Sometime in the early night, you hear a sound that cuts through the surf's rhythm. A dry crack from the cliff, then a clatter of small stones. It is minor, a little rock fall, nothing dramatic, but it is enough to make you sit up and listen. The cliff is always adjusting, always responding to undercutting and vibration and thermal stress. It is a living edge if you define living as constantly trying to fall. You wait a long minute, then lie back down. There is no action to take except being as far as you can be, which is not far. Eventually, the night settles into a steadier pattern. Wave impact. Retreat. Wind hush. Repeat. Your breathing syncs with it, whether you want it to or not. And then, without ceremony, the world begins to lighten. Not sunrise, not yet. Just a thinning of black into deep blue. The first hint that time is moving again. You sit up and look along the beach. The sand has changed shape overnight, ridges and shallow troughs rearranged by wave reach. A line of dampness marks the highest water made it while you were half asleep. It is closer to your pack than you like. The ocean walked up in the dark, inspected your camp, then stepped back. You stand and stretch, and your muscles complain in a tired, honest way. You drink the last of the water you poured for morning, and it tastes faintly of plastic and salt air. You pack slowly because you are waiting for the wind to decide what kind of day it will be. You look up at the cliff face in the new light and notice something you missed yesterday. Horizontal lines, not just bedding layers, but notches, small ledges cut into the rock at consistent heights. Terraces, like steps, as if the sea used to stand higher here and took its time biting. You walk closer and run your fingers along one notch. The rock is smoother inside it, polished by wave action long ago. Above it, the surface is rougher, more weathered. This is a timestamp, a fossil shoreline, stranded when the land rose or the sea fell. You step back and scan the wall again. There is another notch higher up, faint but visible, and another. The coast is a ledger. Each line is a past sea level, a past balance between uplift and water. You think you are standing on a stable beach. Wrong. You are standing on a moving boundary between a rising island and a restless ocean. The terraces tell you the island has been lifting over time. Not smoothly, but in pulses. Uplift can happen slowly as the crust adjusts, or in jumps during tectonic events. Socotra sits near a region where plates have been pulling apart for millions of years. Rifting created the fragment, but rifting also creates faults, and faults can keep moving. Even small movements matter. When waves have eternity to exploit new cracks, you look down at the beach again and notice boulders that do not belong here. Large rounded blocks sitting above the reach of most waves. They are too heavy to be rolled up casually. Either a truly violent storm placed them, or the land rose around them after they were deposited. Probably both, because the planet loves redundancy. You walk along the base of the cliff using the morning calm to cover distance. You are still heading west, still looking for a safer route, maybe a cove that softens into sand. But now you are also reading the coast as a history book. Every notch is a chapter. Every collapse is a footnote written in rubble. As you move, you see small pockets where sand has collected behind rocks. In those pockets, a few tough plants have taken root, low and scrubby. They are not thriving. They are persisting, which is the highest achievement on a coast like this. A crab skitters into a hole at your approach, offended by your land mammal clumsiness. You keep your eyes up and ahead because you are watching for cliff hazards and for any sign of human presence. Fishing villages survive on this edge, but only where the coast offers a negotiation. A small cove, a beach wide enough to pull boats above the tide line, a gap in the reef where waves do not break with murderous enthusiasm. The first sign is not a house. It is a path, a faint track in the talus, worn into the slope where feet have repeated the same careful descent. Then you see a coil of rope snagged on a rock, sun-bleached and stiff. Human evidence always looks tired here. You round a bend and find a small cove, just wide enough to feel like relief. The cliff curves inward and the waves, while still loud, break at a slightly different angle. There is a strip of sand mixed with pebbles, and above it, a flat area with a few stacked stones. Someone camps here, or rests here, or waits here for the sea to behave. You stand and listen for engines, voices, any sign of morning activity. Nothing. The village, if there is one, is farther along or around the next headland. You look out to sea and see a pattern of white lines where waves break over submerged rock. The reef is close and it is doing its job, taking the first hit. Reefs are coastal body armor. They also create their own hazards because they make nearshore waters chaotic. You imagine trying to land a small boat here with a load of supplies? Timing, skill, and luck. Mostly luck. You follow the sand inward to the back of the cove where the cliff meets a slope. There is a small seep line, darker rock stained by moisture. It is not a spring you can bottle. It is just dampness. But it tells you something important. Water is still moving through the cliff, even here. It is not generous, but it exists. That means the terraces and notches are not only wave work. Rain, when it comes, infiltrates cracks and finds exits along contacts. The whole island is leaking in slow motion. You sit on a rock and take out your notes, not to write poetry, but to force your mind to connect the traverse. You came in through wadis that were dry scars. You watched water vanish into limestone like a drain swallowing a bath. You climbed to a fog line where plants drink air because soil cannot be trusted. You crossed onto granite where everything becomes fracture and wind. You got forced forward by rockfall because the island does not like return trips. You followed faults like railways because faults are the only honest plumbing. And now you are at the rim where the sea is sanding the island back into itself. Rifting made the fragment. Uplift raised it. Karst hid the water. Fog fed the plateau. Faults leaked springs. Waves chewed the edges. It is one chain, one system, not separate attractions. The discomfort is that none of it is rare in planetary terms. It is only rare that you get to see the whole argument in one small place. You stand again because thinking makes you feel too still, and stillness invites wind to notice you. The breeze is lighter now, but it is shifting, turning slightly, as if the monsoon is testing a new direction. You can feel the air dry out again, even as the surf keeps throwing spray. Socotra loves contradictions. You decide to keep moving along the coast because you need to find a clearer exit inland, something less suicidal than Talus. The map suggests a track that climbs from a fishing area up to the interior, but the map also suggested that pass was stable, and you saw how that went. So you trust your eyes first. You follow the cove's back edge, where a faint trail climbs onto a low ridge. The trail is rough, cut into loose soil and rock, and it smells faintly of goats. Of course it does. Goats have been everywhere you have been, like persistent punctuation. As you climb, you glance back and see the terraces from a new angle. They line up more clearly now, a staircase carved by sea levels that stayed put long enough to do work. Sea level changes for two main reasons that matter here. The ocean itself rises and falls when ice ages grow and melt elsewhere, and the land rises and falls when tectonics and isostatic adjustments decide to be involved. Isostatic rebound sounds like a yoga pose. It is the crust slowly springing back after being loaded or unloaded, often by ice. Socotra did not have glaciers crushing it, but the principle still applies. The crust flexes under changing forces, and faults release that flex in steps. Each notch is a memory of balance, a brief calm in a long fight. You crest the low ridge and finally see more of the south coast stretching away. It is jagged, broken, with headlands and small coves like missing teeth. Farther west, you can make out pale dunes, a softer texture against dark rock, a beach that looks more forgiving, maybe near Kwalinsaya facing waters, where currents and wind shape sand into longer strands. That is your next aim, because sand usually means access. It means someone can land. It means humans have a chance of being present, and humans occasionally have water. You descend the far side of the ridge into a shallow valley that runs parallel to the coast. The ground here is a mix of gravel and wind-blown sand. Small shrubs cling to the low spots, and the air feels hotter away from the immediate spray. The sea sound is still there, but it becomes background again, like a threat that has learned patience. You walk for an hour with the cliff line off to your left, just out of sight, and low hills to your right. The wind keeps shifting in small mood swings. Sometimes it brings a cool breath from the sea. Sometimes it brings a dry breath from inland, carrying dust that sticks to sweat on your skin. You check your bottle again, and you start doing the math you hate. Distance to the next known settlement, unknown. Heat load, high. Wind, variable. Your body, stubborn but not magical. You look for any sign of groundwater, even a few greener plants in a line. Nothing consistent. You keep walking anyway, because the island does not reward waiting for certainty. The valley floor looks soft from a distance, but up close it is gravel over hard pan. Each step makes a dry crunch, like you are walking on ground bones. The sun climbs higher, and the air starts to shimmer near the surface. Heat haze is the planet's way of telling you to stop pretending you are efficient. You angle slightly inland, away from the cliff line, looking for any cut or gully. Coasts like this rarely give you water, but they sometimes give you a route. A small rise ahead breaks the wind for a moment, and you feel the silence. Not true silence, just the surf muffled like someone closed a door. That is when you hear it, a faint clinking, irregular, coming from beyond the rise. Goat bells. Congratulations. You have found the island's most reliable logistics network, which is an animal that eats everything. You crest the rise carefully, and the ground drops into a shallow bowl. There is a cluster of thorny shrubs, a few stunted trees, and a low stone pen. A man stands near it, leaning on a stick, watching goats dismantle the landscape politely. He looks at you, then at your bottle, then back at you. The exchange is efficient, almost professional. You greet him, and he answers with a nod that spends no extra energy. You ask for water with your hands as much as your words. He points, not to the pen, but to a dark line at the base of a slope. You walk over and see a shallow pit, lined with stones, covered by a warped sheet of metal. He lifts it, and the smell hits first. Stale damp, mineral, a hint of algae, like a bucket left in shade too long. There is water in the pit, a few inches deep, protected from sun and goats. Not a spring, not flowing, just stored. You scoop a little into your palm and taste it. It is warm, gritty, but it is water. You fill slowly because you do not know how fast he can replace it. He watches your hands, not your face, counting your need against his. You cap the bottle and offer him something small, a snack, a gesture. He takes it without ceremony, like this transaction has happened in other forms for centuries. You ask how this water stays here, and he points upslope again. You follow his finger and see a pale seam in the hillside, a broken line of rock, a fracture zone. When rare rains come, water runs down the slope, hits the fracture, and sinks. It collects in shallow pockets where clay and crushed rock slow it down. He has learned the hillside's storage points, the way you learned fault lines. You ask about the wind, and he laughs once, short and dry. He points out to sea, then swings his hand inland, mimicking a flip. Monsoon. One season the wind comes moist and gentle enough to make fog behave. Another season it comes dry and violent, turning the sea into a barricade. You check the sky again, and you do not like how clean it looks. Clear air here is not friendly. It is an exposed nerve. You thank him because you cannot do much else. Then you keep moving west because your only window is still closing. The valley gradually widens and the ground shifts under your feet. More sand now, less gravel, the grains finer and lighter. Wind has been working this corridor, sorting particles like a bored accountant. Heavy stones stay put. Light sand migrates, gathers, then moves again. You start seeing small ripples on the surface, tiny dunes that point downwind. The dunes are like arrows, and they are not pointing toward comfort. The surf sound grows louder again as you drift closer to the coast. Then, the landscape ahead changes texture in a way your tired brain registers as relief. A long, pale strand, flat and open, with low dunes behind it. A beach that is actually a beach. Not a rock trap, not a cliff base, but a working margin. You crest another rise and see it fully, a sweeping arc of sand, the ocean pulling at it gently. Gently, for now, anyway. Offshore, the watercolor shifts in bands, turquoise to deep blue, hinting at reefs and drop-offs. A few small boats sit above the tide line, flipped like sleeping insects. And beyond them, low buildings, scattered, close to the sand, but not too close. A fishing settlement, living at the edge of the island's patience. You walk toward it, and the wind carries new smells. Fish drying, smoke, salt, and human presence. Your shoulders unclench slightly, which is how you know you were tense. As you approach, dogs notice you first, because dogs always notice you first. They bark with the confidence of animals who have never carried water uphill. A boy calls them off, and they retreat, still judging you. You greet him, then someone older again. Because villages here are layered. You ask about water, and this time the answer is not a shrug. They point inland toward a line of low hills and then to a specific track. There is a well, they tell you, but it is brackish. There is a tank, but it depends on deliveries. Fresh water comes from higher ground when roads are passable, when the sea allows boats, when the wind is not angry. Everything is conditional. A woman brings you a small cup anyway, water that tastes faintly of plastic and salt. It is not perfect, but it is offered, and you drink it like it is. You sit in the shade of a wall that blocks wind, and the relief is immediate. Shade is not just cooler, it is permission to breathe slowly. You watch the beach for a while, because your body needs to believe you have time. Men mend nets with hands that have done this 1,000 times. A boat is dragged higher by several people at once, because tides here do not negotiate. The ocean is calmer than yesterday's cliff base, but you do not trust it. Calm water is often just a pause between edits. You look at the dunes behind the beach, and you notice how they lean. Wind has been building them from one direction consistently, pushing sand inland. That sand came from somewhere, from reefs ground down, from limestone cliffs reduced to grains, from shells crushed under waves. This beach is not a feature, it is a storage unit for erosion. And storage units fill, then spill. A man sits near you and asks where you came from, and you gesture vaguely to the east. He raises his eyebrows, because he knows what that implies. Cliffs, blowholes, bad footing. He says something that does not need translation. Why? You give the only answer that ever makes sense in fieldwork. Because the island is easier to understand when it hurts a little. You ask him about the terraces you saw at the cliff base, those notches in stone. He nods and points at the ground under you, then lifts his hand upward in steps. The island rose, he says, and the sea stood here, then there. Old people talk about storms that threw rocks like gifts, leaving boulders where boulders should not be. He gestures to the far end of the beach, where a few large stones sit near the dunes. Storm stones. You walk over to them because you cannot help yourself. They are rounded, heavy, the kind of rock that wants to be left alone. You put your hand on one and feel its coolness under the morning sun. It does not belong in sand, but here it is, like a misplaced tooth. A storm wave can move impossible things if the timing is right. Add a high tide, add low pressure, add a swell generated by wind far away, and you get water with leverage. The ocean becomes a forklift. These boulders are proof that the calm you are enjoying is not a personality trait. It is a temporary condition. You turn and look inland again because your bigger task is still unfinished. You crossed Wadis, plateau, granite spine, fault springs, and coast, but you have not yet done what you came to do, which is to understand why this archipelago stays so wrong. The answer is not just isolation, or just fog, or just rock. It is the way every process here limits the next one, like a chain of locked doors. In the village shade, you spread your map on your knees, and the paper immediately tries to flap away. Someone holds a corner down with a stone, which feels symbolic. You trace your route with a finger, then trace what remains. To close the loop, you need to read the South Coast's structure properly, not just where it is dangerous, but why it is shaped like a broken rim. You need to see how uplift and wave attack balance out, and what that means for people living here. The man points to a headland west of the beach, where cliffs rise again, but not as brutally. There is a track that climbs to a viewpoint, he says, where you can see terraces clearly. He also says, the wind will rise later, because it always does. So, you make the next decision. You go now, while the morning still pretends to be kind. You follow a sandy track that skirts the back of the dunes, then turns into compacted dirt. Goat droppings appear, then footprints, then tire marks that look old. The trek climbs between low hills of mixed rock, sand stuck in pockets. The vegetation is sparse, but you see small, tough plants with waxy leaves built to lose as little moisture as possible. Every leaf here is a budget decision. You gain elevation slowly, and the beach behind you becomes a pale ribbon. The boats shrink, the people become moving dots, and the village looks even more temporary. From up here, you can see how narrow the livable strip is. Between ocean and rock, there is only a thin band where humans can set things down. Everything else is too steep, too dry, too unstable, or all three. You crest a low ridge, and the coast opens up like a diagram. Cliffs, coves, terraces, and notches, all repeating at different heights. Some terraces are wide enough to look like roads carved into the cliff. Others are faint, just a change in texture and shadow. You sit on a flat rock and let your breathing settle, because this is where the explanation becomes visible. A wave cuts a notch at sea level, because that is where it hits repeatedly. If sea level stays stable for a long time, the notch deepens. If the land rises, the notch gets lifted out of reach, stranded. Then the sea starts cutting a new notch at the new level. Repeat this enough times, and the cliff becomes a staircase of old shorelines. Socotra has that staircase because it has been lifted, slowly and sometimes in pulses. As the region adjusts to rifting forces, the Gulf of Aden opened, and the crust around it fractured and shifted. Some blocks rose, some sank, and Socotra, stubborn fragment, ended up perched. Perched does not mean safe. Perched means waves have a taller wall to work on, and gravity has more material to drop. You look down at the surf, and it looks smaller from here, which is the most dangerous optical illusion. Wave energy is not about height alone. It is about mass, speed, and repetition. The sea is a patient striker. Even on calm days, it hits thousands of times, and each hit steals crunks. On storm days, it steals chunks. You spot a section of cliff where the face is fresher, a pale rectangle of exposed rock, a recent collapse scar. Below it, broken blocks sit like a scattered jaw. The island is actively shrinking at the edges, even as uplift keeps it tall in the middle. That is the island's personality in one sentence. Rise, then crumble. Hold, then leak. Build, then erode. You pull out your notebook again and write down the chain, because you will forget the clean logic once you are tired again. Rifting isolates the fragment. Uplift raises the core. Karst hides water. Fog replaces rivers in the highlands. Faults leak springs into the interior. Waves attack the rim, carving terraces that prove the fight has been going on a long time. And in the middle of all of this, life adapts to scarcity by becoming strange. Dragon's blood, trees that build their own shade, frankincense that bleeds resin to seal wounds and reduce loss, animals that browse everything because there is never enough. Humans that live on the few negotiating points, coves and springs, and tracks that work only part-time. A gust hits the ridge and reminds you the wind schedule is real. It pushes at your back, trying to hurry you along. The air gets drier in minutes, the salt haze sharpening. You stand and start back down, because you do not want to be on an exposed ridge when the afternoon wind decides to prove itself. On the descent, you notice something else, a subtle pattern in the rocks underfoot. Rounded pebbles mixed with angular fragments, set in a gritty matrix. Old beach deposits. You are walking on what used to be shoreline materials, lifted and cemented into place. The island has been building itself upward by rearranging its own edges. It is recycling coast into cliff, cliff into terrace, terrace into upland. Deep time is efficient like that. Back near the village, the beach looks brighter under a harsher sun. People are more active now because wind will likely rise later, and work must happen in the calmer hours. A boat is being prepared, supplies loaded, the outboard checked. You ask where they go, and the answer is short. To other islands sometimes, to different coves, to where fish are. You mention the monsoon, and their faces shift slightly. Not fear, just respect for a schedule that overrides plans. When the wind flips, the sea becomes a locked door. No deliveries, no easy travel, no rescue. Even fishing becomes a gamble, and gambles do not feed children reliably. You ask about water again, and they point to a plastic tank near a wall. It is half full, sun-warmed, covered loosely to keep out dust. It came by boat when conditions allowed. They do not waste it on washing. They use seawater for that and save fresh water for drinking. Your mouth feels dry just hearing the system described. You top off your bottle with a careful pour, thanked and watched. Then you look east, where the hills you crossed hide the interior. You could stay here, rest, pretend this was the destination, but you still need to finish the traverse in your head, because understanding requires one more thing. It requires seeing how the processes you followed will keep going after you leave, and that means spending another night on the coast, watching the wind, reading the tide lines, and letting the place tell you what comes next. You find a spot above the beach, behind the first line of dunes, where wind is quieter. Sand here is finer, soft enough to kneel without pain. You set your pack down and dig a shallow depression for your sleeping pad, because sand is a surprisingly good carpenter. The village noise is low, intermittent, like a radio in another room. You can still hear the sea, steady and unbothered. As the afternoon drifts toward evening, the wind does rise, exactly as warned. It comes in pulses, then steadies into a stronger flow. It drives sand grains across the surface, making faint, hissing sounds. You watch the grains move, and you realize you are watching erosion in real time. Not dramatic cliff collapse erosion, but quiet migration. Each grain hops, slides, settles, then moves again. This is how dunes walk inland, slowly burying whatever sits in their path. Villages adapt by being light, by not building too much that needs permanence. Permanence is expensive here. A man walks by carrying a bundle of wood, and you wonder where he got it, because trees are not generous on this coast. He probably gathered driftwood or cut from sparse inland scrub, because fuel is also a geography problem. Everything is a geography problem if you live on an island. The sun lowers, and the beach becomes less blinding. The sea surface turns darker, textured by wind, little ripples marching toward shore. You watch the wave sets because you are learning the coast's rhythm the way you learned Wadi's. Not because it is soothing, but because patterns keep you alive. At high tide, the water reaches farther up the beach, licking closer to the boats. People move them again, a little higher, as if negotiating with an animal. You notice the line of seaweed and debris left behind. A rack line. It marks today's high reach, but it will not be tomorrow's. Tide, wind, and swell make a three-way argument every night. As twilight deepens, the wind finally eases slightly. As if exhausted by its own performance, you lie down and watch stars appear again, crisp and indifferent. The sand under you holds the day's warmth for a while, then slowly gives it up. The temperature drop feels like a small mercy. You let your mind run back through the island, because this is how fieldwork becomes understanding. Socotra is not weird because it is exotic. It is weird because it is isolated long enough for small decisions to become permanent. A monsoon pattern that brings fog to one plateau edge, but not another. A limestone cap that hides water underground, forcing plants to adapt to unpredictability. A granite core that lifts just enough to catch wind, but not enough to be gentle. A coastline that keeps getting recut every time sea level and uplift renegotiate. A thin soil layer that never gets to relax because goats and wind treat it like a shared snack. You lie there in the dune hollow and you realize the island is an argument between storage and loss. Water stored in limestone voids, then lost to evaporation and seepage. Sand stored on the beach, then lost to the first strong gust. Life stored in strange lineages, then pruned by scarcity into even stranger shapes. The sea keeps its own schedule, and you are not on it. You listen to waves for a long time, and the rhythm starts to feel like counting. Not counting minutes, counting impacts. Each impact is small, but they stack. That is how coastlines move, and that is how people here learn patience the hard way. Somewhere behind the village, a dog barks once, then gives up. A door creaks, a cough, the small human noises that prove someone is awake and worrying. You let your eyes close again, and the wind threads sand across the surface like quiet static. It is almost soothing until you remember that the same motion will bury a fence if you ignore it. You sleep in short, careful pieces. When you wake again, the sky is lighter, but the sun is not up. Pre-dawn, the hour that feels like the island is holding its breath. The wind has eased, not gone, just tired for a moment. The surf sounds flatter, less explosive, like the swell is resting its shoulders. You sit up, and your mouth tastes like salt and last night's rationed water. You stand, and the sand slides under your feet, already trying to rearrange itself. You walk to the rack line and look at what the sea left. Seaweed, bits of shell, a smooth shard of coral like a broken tooth, and a few small pebbles that look polished in a way the dunes never manage. Wave polished, evidence that even here, where it looks calm, the sea has been grinding. You follow the beach edge while it is cool enough to move. You are not sightseeing now. You are checking the island's receipts. Terraces up on the cliff, storm boulders on the sand, dunes migrating inland. All of it says the same thing. This place is not stable. It is just slow. You cut closer to the village again because you need one more practical thing before you move. A confirmation, a route inland that does not rely on your optimism. A man is already awake near the boats, hands busy with rope. He looks at you, then at the hills, and he points to a track that climbs like a faded scar. He draws a line in the air, up and over, then taps his chest twice, hard. He is not warning you about distance. He is warning you about dry ground. You nod because you already knew. You ask with your hands about water on that route. He pinches his fingers close together, a small amount, then points higher. Higher means springs, if the geology cooperates. Lower means brackish wells and plastic tanks. You thank him with the only currency you have left, respect, and not wasting his time. You shoulder your pack again, and your body complains like an old hinge. Then you start inland because the coast is not where fresh water lives. The track leaves the sand and becomes compacted dirt, pale and dusty. It threads between low shrubs that smell faintly medicinal when you brush them. The air warms quickly as the sun clears the horizon. You feel it on the back of your neck first, then across your shoulders, like a hand pressing down. The breeze follows, but now it is a dry breeze, stripped of any kindness. You climb steadily, and the village behind you shrinks into a strip of color against the sand. From above, it looks even more temporary. A few walls, a few boats, a few paths that wind could erase if it felt motivated. You stop once to look back at the water. The sea is calm enough to look innocent, which is always suspicious. Offshore, the surface has faint lines, long and parallel, hinting at swell coming from far away. Distant wind making future trouble. You turn away before you start trying to predict it, because prediction is how you lose time. The track steepens as it climbs into low hills of mixed rock. Sand gives way to gravel, then to sharper fragments. The ground under you becomes less dune and more skeleton. You notice the first limestone again, pale slabs cropping out, pitted and rough. Then a darker band, more fractured, where stone breaks into angular chunks, a contact zone. Another boundary where the island stitched itself together badly. The contact matters because boundaries decide where water moves. Permeable rock next to less permeable rock. And water gets forced sideways, then out. You watch for mineral stains, for sudden green, for anything that looks like leakage. For an hour you see nothing, which is its own message. This slope does not store, it sheds. The sun climbs higher, and you feel your water bottle become a heavier responsibility. You sip once, small, and the sip feels like paperwork. Ahead, the track bends around a ridge, and you see a shallow valley on the far side. Not lush, not even friendly, but flatter. Flatter means runoff collects there first, even if only briefly. You descend into it and find a line of scrub that is slightly taller. That slight difference pulls you like a magnet. You follow it, stepping off the main track, because the track is for trucks, not for finding springs. In the shade of a rock outcrop, you smell dampness before you see it. It is faint, like wet stone that dried too recently. You kneel and put your hand on the ground. Cool, not cold, but cooler than sun-baked gravel. You scratch away a thin layer of dust, and beneath it, the sediment darkens. Moisture is here, close to the surface, hiding under a crust. You dig a little more with a flat stone, and the hole begins to glisten at the bottom. Not a pool, not yet, just the sheen of water seeping into the space you made. It is slow, but it is real. Congratulations. You have found the most exhausting kind of water, the kind that requires you to sit and wait. You do wait, because waiting is cheaper than walking blind. The seep gathers a shallow puddle, enough to wet your fingers. You taste it cautiously, expecting salt. It is not salty, just earthy with a mineral bite. Fresh enough, you use a cup to scoop, little by little, topping off what you can without emptying the seep entirely. This is not just hydration. This is evidence. The valley collects runoff, the contact zone traps it, and the water lingers in shallow sediments. A tiny version of the island's whole logic. Store what you can, lose the rest. You sit back on your heels and scan the valley walls. You can see small rills etched into the slope, channels that only carry water during brief storms. They look harmless now, but you remember flood marks in wadis far inland? Same principle, smaller scale, most days, nothing. Some days, a wall. You fill your bottle a final time, cap it tight, and stand. The day is advancing, and you still need to connect one more thread in your head. How the south coast, the dunes, the terraces, and this inland seep all belong to one system. So you keep moving, climbing again toward a higher shoulder of land that overlooks the coast. Not for the view, but for the shape. From higher ground you can see drainage lines, fault traces, and terrace levels at once. You reach the shoulder as the sun becomes harsh. Wind returns, stronger now, and it pushes against your chest as if testing your balance. You stand with feet planted and let the gust pass. Then you look out. The beach arcs below, pale and long. Behind it, dunes form low ridges like ripples frozen in place. Beyond that, the hills you crossed look scraped and dry, cut by shallow channels that aim toward the sea. And on the cliff sections farther east, you can see terraces again, thin horizontal lines on dark rock. The whole coastline reads like a bar graph of time. Some lines are higher, older, lifted. Some are lower, younger, being cut right now. You trace them with your eyes, and you realize something that feels obvious too late. This coast is not a single story of erosion. It is a stacked story of pause and motion. Sea level pauses during stable climate periods, and waves cut in. Then, climate shifts, ice grows or melts, and sea level relocates. At the same time, the land itself adjusts, slowly flexing under tectonic stress. Sometimes both happen together, and the coast records the confusion as multiple terraces. You look down at the dunes again, and you see they are doing their own version of this. Wind strength and direction change seasonally, and the dunes respond. They build during one pattern, flatten during another. They are wind terraces, moving far faster than rock terraces, but following the same idea. Stable conditions make structure. Shifts destroy it. You start walking along the shoulder because you want to find where that inland seep line might connect to a larger drainage, a place where the valley becomes a wadi that reaches the coast If you can see that connection, you can close the loop on how water moves here, from cloud to karst, to spring to sea. The shoulder narrows into a ridge, and the ground becomes rockier. You step over a band of limestone that is cracked into plates, then onto darker rock that feels denser. The transition is abrupt, and you pause to look closely. Limestone above, older basement below, mixed in a messy boundary. This is where uplift and erosion have peeled back layers like torn fabric. You pick up a small fragment of limestone and rub it between your fingers. It powders slightly, leaving pale dust. That dust will travel. It will settle in low spots, add a thin skin of soil, then get eaten by goats or blown away. You pick up a darker fragment, harder, and it does not powder. It just sits there, stubborn. Two materials, two speeds of breakdown. That difference alone can shape a landscape. Soft rock erodes into hollows. Hard rock stands as ridges. Water follows the hollows. Wind scours the ridges. Life clings where the hollows store moisture. You keep walking, and the ridge gives you a view into a shallow drainage that runs toward the beach. The channel is mostly dry, but you can see darker sediment lines and a few scattered boulders. Flood evidence again. The boulders are too large to be moved by polite water. They were dragged in a moment of violence, then abandoned. You follow the drainage downward, using it as a guide, because channels are honest about where gravity wants water to go. As you descend, the air warms and thickens. The wind drops, and you feel the sun more directly. You keep to the edge of the channel where walking is easier, where past flows sorted finer material. In the channel bed, you find a patch of hardened mud, cracked into polygons, old pooled water that evaporated, leaving the geometry of drying. A reminder that even when water arrives, it often stays only long enough to leave patterns. You stop and listen because sometimes you can hear underground water in the quietest parts of a channel. You hear nothing, only the faint hiss of wind over gravel and distant surf. No trickle, no drip. So you move on because you are not here to pretend. The drainage approaches the dunes, and the ground becomes sandier again. Here is where the system gets cruel in a specific way. A wadi can bring fresh water down during storms, but when it reaches sand, the sand drinks it fast. The flow spreads, infiltrates, and disappears underground. Sometimes that is good, because it recharges shallow groundwater. Sometimes it is bad, because it steals surface water before anything can use it. You walk where the channel fades into a broad sandy fan, and you can feel the difference underfoot. Gravel to sand, firm to soft, step to sink. You remember the goat herder's covered pit. Same principle. Store storm water in shallow sediments. Cover it. Protect it from sun. Human survival as sediment management. You angle back toward the village because the heat is building, and you have no reason to be heroic. The village is the only stable point in this part of the coast, and stable is relative. On the way, you pass the storm boulders again. You look at them differently now, not as freak events, but as markers of the coastline's working extremes. Most days, grains move. Some days the sea picks up furniture, and the terraces above prove that those extremes have been repeating longer than any memory here. You reach shade near a wall and sit because your body wants a pause. A child runs past with a plastic container. heading toward the tank. Water is routine here, but it is never casual. You watch the container fill, and you notice how careful the pour is. Not wasteful, not rushed. You find yourself matching that pace. Slower breath, slower thoughts. This is where the island teaches its last lesson. The one that sounds philosophical, but is really just physics. Nothing here is abundant, so everything is patterned. Fog arrives on schedule. Winds flip on schedule. Storms arrive rarely, but with predictable violence. Even goats follow predictable routes because the vegetation patches are fixed by rock and water. If you want to understand why life became so strange, you stop looking for miracles. You look for patterns that last long enough to trap evolution in a corner. A plant that can drink fog will outlive one that waits for rain. A tree that shades its own roots will outcompete one that bakes the soil under it. An animal that can eat almost anything will survive on an island that offers almost nothing. The weirdness is not decoration. It is the logical end of repeated scarcity. The sun climbs, and the village begins to move again. More voices, more steps. A few men gesture toward the sea, reading the surface like a mood. They are deciding whether today is a fishing day or a stay-alive day. You watch them for a moment because it is the human version of reading faults and terraces. Same skill, different medium. One of them points at a line on the horizon, a faint dark band. Weather far away? Not here yet, but it will send swell. You feel your earlier urgency return because swell and wind are the island's doorbolts. When they slide into place, movement stops. You stand and walk back toward your dune hollow because you need your pack and your own timeline. You do not want to be caught exposed again. Not on cliffs, not on ridges. Back at your camp spot, you see how the wind has already worked. Sand has piled slightly against your pack's base. A small drift formed in hours. You brush it away, and the grains immediately start trying to return. You pack with practiced movements, straps tightened, everything secured against gusts. Then you sit for a minute longer because you are trying to decide the next move. Do you push inland again, chasing higher springs and cooler air? Or do you stay near the coast, where humans exist, but water is conditional? The island offers you two kinds of risk. Inland, you risk being alone, with heat and rock. Coast, you risk being trapped by sea and wind when the monsoon commits. You choose inland because the processes you are tracing live there. The coast is where the island gets edited. The high ground is where the island gets written. You leave the village behind again, following a track that climbs toward the interior. This one is more defined, used by vehicles when they dare. It cuts through low hills and bends toward a broader valley that points back toward the mountains. The air changes as you climb, not cooler at first, just less salty. Salt drops out of your taste, replaced by dust, a dry mineral smell, like sun on crushed stone. You walk past a slope where shrubs have been stripped low, brows down to spines. Goats again, the island's moving erosion tool. You think about how grazing does more than remove plants. It removes root systems that hold soil. So when rare rain comes, it has less resistance. It runs faster, cuts deeper, carries more sediment, which means wadis become more violent, more scouring, which means karst systems get clogged and reopened in cycles. Human pressure does not create the island's harshness, but it can turn the volume up. The track rises to a small pass between hills, and for a moment, you can see both worlds. Behind you, the sea, bright and indifferent. Ahead, the interior, layered and dry, leading toward the darker mass of higher rock. You stop there and drink a careful mouthful, not because you are desperate, but because you can feel the heat ramping. Then you keep moving, dropping into the inland side where the wind is quieter. In the valley below, the ground becomes rockier again, and you start seeing more limestone pavement, cracked surfaces, shallow sinkholes,